Okay, Rebel, we've got our first caller. Let's go ahead if you don't mind. Caller, thank you for calling in. Please state your name and where you're calling from.
This is Vivian from Florida.
Hi, Miss Vivian. How are you today?
Great. My question is about the Crucifixion Psalm. I already know about verse 17 and that it's translated like a lion. But it doesn't make sense. It looks like it needs a verb someplace. For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encompassed me like a lion, my hands and feet. It grammatically, like it needs a verb someplace. Did they mean that it's like a pack of lions? And then the other thing, when I read the Crucifixion Psalm, it was very easy for the Christians to repurpose it to support Jesus' crucifixion. I'm wondering if we know it's David, but is there some way? And then my brother said the other night that David was very unpopular. Is there some way that we could see this all in context, what David's talking about here, so that verse 17 makes a lot of sense from the Jewish point of view?
Wonderful. Rabbi, you got it?
I think some explanation is necessary. Obviously, well, the Pope, who watches my show regularly, he might know what this is referring to, but most people might not. So Psalm 22 contains in it a number of passages that the church has used and then applied to Jesus, as though it's a prophecy about Jesus. Now, as it turns out, the chapter is in the first person. King David, the author, is speaking about himself. But the most egregious... Now, I'm going to get to a second question in a moment, but the most egregious manipulation of this text, it's so... Now, one point is, it's so crazy that the New Testament doesn't even quote it. That means whoever did this is like textual forensics. Whoever did this did it after the New Testament, the Christian canon, was completed. And you won't find it anywhere until you go to the 2nd century, and then church fathers did this. This wasn't, because it's not quoted. But in Psalm 22, verse 17, in a Hebrew Bible, now just a warning here, in a Christian Bible, it's verse 16. You're going, well, how is that? Well, it's not really germane to this show, but the Jewish and Christian Bibles don't number the verses the same way on some occasions. Most we are the same, but I'm not going to go into why. But the opening passage of many of the Psalms, Christian Bibles do not give it a verse number, so they start counting one verse later. So just take my word for it. Psalm 22 verse 17 in a Jewish Bible is Psalm 22 verse 16. And the verse ends, Ka'ari yodai v'raglai, which means, like a lion, they're at my hands and my feet. If you open this up in a King James Bible or a New American Standard, it's not going to say that. It's going to say, they pierced my hands and my feet. Whoa, that sounds very Christological. So if you open a King James Bible, the last words of Psalm 22, verse 16 will be, they pierced my hands and my feet. Okay? Well, that definitely sounds like a crucifixion, right? It's hard to imagine that anything else. But if you open up the Hebrew, the key word, the most striking word, the most unambiguous Christological word in all that, pierced, doesn't appear there. In the Hebrew, it simply says, Ka'ari yodai v'raglai. An ari is a lion. The prefix, the kaf in the beginning, means like. So it's like a lion. They're at my hands and my feet. So what the church did was, again, not the New Testament authors. This is after the canon was closed on the Christian Bible. Someone later took the Hebrew, removed the word like a lion, and instead interpolated pierced, and now you have a Christian message. And then to ensure that Christians will actually buy this, So the Christians' Septuagint, and you're going, Christian Septuagint? You bet. That means the church would produce Greek translations, and they would use the word Septuagint about for Christian translations. Now, the word Septuagint is a loaded term because people think, oh, that must be the ancient Jewish translation of the Bible, but that's not true, because that ancient Jewish translation 2,200 years ago, meaning prior to the Christian century, was only the Torah. So the Christian Greek translations of the Jewish Bible were altered in order so that they would comport with a Christological reading, okay? You get that? So the text really says, like a lion, they're at my hands and my feet. And then, but in the Christian Bible, this is why Christians, people go, like, why are these Christians, like, why do they believe this? Because they're reading these New International Version translations. And of course, if they read this kind of stuff, of course that's the conclusion they're going to make. I mean, you can't blame them. These Christians are good people. They're just being loaded with this misinformation. It's the same reason why in North Korea everybody like claps for their their leader and his dead father. It's like a theocracy based on a dead guy. But anyway, why are they so enthusiastic? Because if you're in North Korea, the only information you have is North Korean news, and you have that crazy lady screaming. Well, that's exactly what Christians are subject to, but they don't know it. Now, the person who called, that's delicious. She asked the question, where's the verb? Are, where is it? So, it's beautiful. I waited 35 years for someone to ask that question. So, the answer is that we're going from English is an Indo-European language, and Hebrew is a Semitic language. That is not like going from English to French. That's going to two different families of languages that have nothing in common. Structure in every way, wildly, just completely a whole new ballgame. In the Hebrew language, there is no such verb as a verb being, like you have is and are. It doesn't exist in Hebrew, and that's why it isn't there. So there is no is in Hebrew. There's no are in Hebrew. That verb doesn't exist in the Hebrew language. That's why it ain't there. So that wraps that up. I have a chapter on that in volume 2, but no one ever asked that question. That's a great question. I hope that in some way conveys to all of you, my dear viewers of this show, learn the Hebrew. Hebrew is really a very easy language. I'm not saying it isn't a challenge if you're an English speaker, because it is completely different. It's like, Lahavdil, Chinese, it's like, the letters, everything's different. But another way, Hebrew is easy because it's a very small language, very tiny vocabulary, really, biblical Hebrew. It's because it has such a small vocabulary, it's extremely precise. And it's really a lot of roots, a whole bunch of roots. And if you know them, you'll see the same words basically coming up over and over again. And unlike the English language, which has 8,000 rules and exceptions to rules and Hebrew doesn't have that. For the most part, there is a rare, but it doesn't work that way with Hebrew. To better convey this point, let's say you're reading some writer who's using a very fancy vocabulary and you see a word that you've never seen before, okay? And if you're not sure that such words exist in the English language, which is a humongous language, watch a spelling bee contest for kindergarten kids. You ever watch that and you feel like you're a total idiot? Because these kids, they ask them, what does blah, blah, blah mean? And you're going, oh my God, this kid could spell it. Okay. But if you ever see this word, this English word, and you've never seen it before, you're not quite sure actually how to pronounce it. Is it a hard G, a soft G, a this, that? A million things. How is it properly pronounced? And very frequently, people will pronounce an English word they have never seen before incorrectly because there's so many rules and exceptions and don't ask. But Hebrew doesn't work that way. There are rare exceptions, very rare. But if you see a Hebrew word, you can be almost sure how to pronounce it. It's very, very straightforward. So, therefore, Hebrew is easy, but you need to use it like any language. It is not possible to acquire a language unless you actually employ it and use it.
Okay, this question is on the same topic. The Hebrew word in there, ka'ari, isn't, we know the kaf for ka means as, but ari isn't,
like.
Is there, it's like as or like, got it. Is there anything else, if they were to try to interpret it with the English that's there now, is there anything else that doesn't work? I mean, like there's another verse somewhere where there's a Hebrew word used and they say this is what it means, but really, I think it has to do with Psalm 22 in the Knuckle scroll that they found there, where it said something about the hand or something, where it's like it was misspelled, and even if it was spelled right, something about it's wrong.
Let me take over.
Okay, good, thank you. Please do.
It's all right. So here's the deal. So you might be asking yourself a question. Here we have a passage in Psalm 22. The reason why it's called the Crucifixion Psalm is not just because of this verse, which had been mistranslated, but other verses in this chapter were lifted by the New Testament writers and inserted in the mouth of Jesus, or are used to describe events surrounding the crucifixion. For example, in Mark's cry of dereliction, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" So that is one of the 7 endings found in the Gospels of what does Jesus say as he's crucified, as he's about to die. So in Mark, it's, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So then that's taken and placed in the mouth of Jesus. But David is speaking about himself, as we will see in just a moment. He's not, it doesn't even make sense Christologically, because why would Jesus be going, why did you forsake me? Jesus has already, it makes no sense. Jesus already, if we are to believe the book of Mark, we have already been told in Mark chapter 8 that Jesus predicted that he's going to suffer and be killed, suffer many things from the Jewish elders and be killed. He said that openly. So, and predicted everything else after that. So the question is, what do you mean, why did you forsake me? He's not forsaking me. This is part of God's plan. Not only that, if we are to believe what Christians tell us ad nauseum, that it was predicted in the Jewish Bible that the Messiah is supposed to suffer and die, so what the heck is he asking? Why have you forsaken me? How is that forsaking me? That's exactly what you're supposed to go through in order to be the Messiah. Muchrech leimer, which means, therefore, you see, you get yourself in trouble when you lie. This is where they get into all the trouble. If you tell the truth, you don't have a problem, right? If you're lying, then you have to be James Bond. The reason why James Bond is so interesting, the movie, is that no matter how many lies he tells, he can go through customs, he can go through anywhere he wants to, and he can lie, and he gets away, and everyone believes him. But you have to be, the Gemara says, the Talmud says, a liar has to be very smart. Mark Twain said this also. If you're telling the truth, you don't have to be smart. You don't have to keep track of everything you've said. If you're telling the truth, it's going to all fit. So they get themselves in a lot of trouble. First of all, if Jesus is the second person of the triune Godhead, that means he is God manifested in the flesh. He is God, eternal God. And he isn't less God because of his humanity. And the church doesn't say that he's 50% God and 50% human. He's 100% divine and 100% human. This is very important of what the Nicene Creed is that was essentially hammered out in Nicaea in 325. So who is he talking to? Who is he complaining to? Why is he complaining? This is exactly what you're supposed to do. It makes no sense at all. Now, in truth, the author of Mark, we don't know who wrote it. It's written anonymously. I know I didn't get to your question yet, but I just want everyone to understand this. is presenting an adoptionist Christology, which means that Mark wouldn't know what the Trinity was if it hit him over the head. Whoever wrote the earliest of the four Gospels, which was written somewhere about the year 70, around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, although it's not listed first in a Christian Bible, because a Christian Bible follows the order of books that ultimately was forged, that Augustine ultimately put down, that we're going to start with Matthew. We're not going to go why, that's not germane to this program either. But the key point is that Mark is earliest, Mark is adoptionist. What does adoptionist mean? Adoptionist means that Jesus was a person and born of a mommy and a daddy, not born of a virgin. And that's why we are introduced to Jesus in the book of Mark, not at his birth, conception, nothing like that, but at his baptism. So in the adoptionist viewpoint is that Jesus was a very righteous, great person, and God adopted him, chose him as his son, and he is informed of this in the baptism, which we find in the opening passages of the book of Mark, immediately after the incipit. And then he was elevated and he was exalted to a very high state. Okay, that's Mark's view. That's how the author of the book of Mark that was his Christology. Now, fundamentalist Christians reject this. They have to, because the moment they concede that Mark's Christology is different than John's, which is an incarnation Christology. He had an incarnation theology, which means Jesus was before, came down. He went. So then the New Testament is not the Word of God. Okay, we have two completely different views of Jesus and how he became the Son of God, if he ever became anything. Okay, but I don't want to go too far amiss. So therefore, going back to Mark's passion narrative. Mark's passion narrative is huge. Mark's passion. Many New Testament scholars refer to the book of Mark as one big passion narrative, with a long introduction. The whole last third of the book of Mark is the passion narrative. So it doesn't make sense. Why is he crying? Why was Venter? Why is he crying about? What are you talking about? You just said that this is exactly what's going to happen. So of course it's happening. What are you crying? And you're God. And if you're crying you're complaining, who are you complaining to? Not only that, it goes further, because if you go to Psalm 22 in the very beginning, you'll see that King David is crying and really saying, bewildered why God is not there for him, because he says, I'm paraphrasing it, but please read it for yourself. In the opening of Psalm 22, the writer, David, he's speaking first person. He's not saying there will be a Messiah or there'll be someone in the future who will do this. He says about himself that you listened to my ancestors when they cried out to you. Why don't you listen to me? That's a paraphrase. Why is Jesus complaining to God? Who is he complaining to? And why would he complain? We're told by Jews for Jesus from morning till night, the Messiah was always supposed to die and suffer sins, and the Jews hid this. We hid Isaiah 53. Nonsense. Of course, it doesn't fit even into the New Testament narrative. Now let's go to your point, okay, to your question. So, many people watching this broadcast right now may be wondering, well, do Christians have any response to any of this? The Christians, let me just one part of this. The Christians have a response to the point that the Hebrew in Psalm 22:17, and again, reminder, in a Christian Bible, it's verse 16, but the Hebrew, of course, is 17, ends with the words ko'ari. Now, this is a real easy word. Ari is a lion. Ko'ari means like a lion. This word also appears many times in the Jewish Bible. For example, in Isaiah 38:13, when Hezekiah is praying to God as God is healing him, He says, please look it up for yourself. And if you can't read Hebrew, it's no excuse, because you can go online, look at Isaiah 38:13, and it says, Shivisi ad boker, the fourth word, Ka'ari. Look at the shapes of the letters, same word, exact same word. And then go to Psalm 22, verse 17 in the Hebrew Bible, and just put it online, and you'll see it's the exact same word. But in Isaiah 38:13, it has no Christological import. So the church doesn't change it. And the King James and all the other Christian Bibles correctly translate that exact same word like a lion. Only Psalm 22 appears. The word Ari means a lion. I know I want to give all the information. King David is using the animal motif constantly. In fact, if you please go to Psalm 17, verse 11 and 12. Go even a little further in Psalm 22. You'll see he's constantly talking about animals as his enemies. Now, your question may be, do Christians have a response to this? Like, what would Jews for Jesus say? So it turns out they do. Okay? As it turns out, if you open like a Jews for Jesus pamphlets on this, like Martin Rosen, who's the founder of Jews for Jesus, his pamphlet called Yeshua, which I don't know how many they sold or gave away or whatever. So he comes up with this answer. Listen carefully. He says that it's true, granted, the word Ka'ari. Ari means a lion. George W. Bush's press secretary, his name was Ari Fleischer. Okay, so that's his first name is Ari, lion. Everyone knows that name. It's a man's name. And Ka'ari means like a lion. That word definitely means like a lion, Rosen says. This is not his own invention. Others have advanced this. Granted. But as it turns out, if you look at the letters Ka'ari, which is spelled how? Kaf, Aleph, Resh, Yud. As it turns out, that last letter in the Hebrew word, the Yud, there is one letter that's very close to a Yud, that almost looks like a Yud. In fact, there are no two letters that look more similar than a Yud and a Vav. The Yud being the 10th letter, the Vav being the 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which has 22 letters. But if you take the Yud and you extend it down, you give it a foot, so that it touches the bottom, it then is a Vav. Here's the argument. The original word might have been not Ka'ari. The original word might have been Ka'aru, with a Vav at the end of the word. And the scribe made a mistake, and these are the nice people. Some will say the rabbis did this because they didn't want you to believe in Jesus. So the word originally, they argue, was originally Ka'aru, which they say means pierced. And then some scribe made a mistake and made it Ka'ari, which they concede means like a lion. But our Hebrew text is actually incorrect. And that's the argument that's made. Now, this is a torturous argument, obviously, because how do you change it? So a scribe in Tiberias made a mistake. I mean, how would that affect Jews in Iraq? I mean, there's a conspiracy theory all over the world. There are some Christians that are really not nice and say the Jews deliberately did this, like they hid Isaiah 53, because they didn't want people to believe in Jesus. Now we're going to go to your point. The very sophisticated Christians go, whoa, not only that. I mean, it does sound very far-fetched. What's your proof? Where's your evidence? You open up any Tanakh in the world, it says Ka'ari. Even open up a Hebrew Bible published by Christians. You can go like an interlinear Bible put out by Zondervan, Kohlenberger's, it says Ka'ari. So, with a Yud. Yeah, so they'll put a Ka'ari there. They say it our way, not their way. Where did you come up with that? Say, we have proof. Why? Because as it turns out, so most people, when they think about the Dead Sea Scrolls, they think of Qumran. But actually there's another discovery of scrolls of text in an area called Nachal Chever, which is, 30 kilometers from Qumran. And those are a little bit later. Not as old as Qumran. Qumran goes back 1st, 2nd, 3rd century BC, where we don't have that text. We just don't have that part of Psalms. We don't have, it's missing. We almost had it, but we don't. It means it's not there. We have parts. We have lots of Psalms, but that Psalm 22, verse 17, we don't have. But we do have Knuckle Chever. And to date Knuckle Chever, so Knuckle Chever is somewhere before, before the Bar Kokhba revolt, somewhere in the 2nd century. So it's still very ancient. And lo and behold, if you open up fragment number, so it's fragment number, fragment number is HEV, I believe 5/6, column 7, fragment 9. I may have got that off. I covered this in volume 2, but I believe that's the exact location. And lo and behold, if you look at the text from Knuckle Chever, you will find that it looks like it might be actually a vav there. Okay, so here we have, this is not as old as Qumran Dead Sea Scroll text, but it's still very ancient. Still, let's say 1800, 1900 years old. It's not 2200, but it's still very ancient. And it is, now, something about Knuckle Chever, these texts, these are not as well defined as some of the exquisite texts of the Dead Sea. They're not as well written. I don't blame these scribes, because God only knows they're writing in the middle of a desert in the hot with no air conditioner, so people make mistakes. But so it's not clear. If you look at it, remember, Yud is like this and a Vav is like this, and it's like, I don't know. So, but what I want to do is, I want to concede the point, which means there's a disagreement, is that a Yud or a Vav? And in my volume 2, I actually have the fragment there for all to see. So, but let's just concede the point that the scribe in the word ko'ar, in that word wrote ko'aru, not ko'ari. Oh, so this now gives, here's your smoking gun, apparently. Because here, if that is a vav, then they argue that means pierced. The answer to that assertion is so many, I don't even know where to begin. Let's start here. It presupposes, and people fall for this because it sounds, they say it with such certainty, ko'aru means pierced, and the answer is ko'aru doesn't mean pierced. There's a word, as it turns out, the word kaf aleph resh vav means nothing. It's absolutely gibberish. There is no such word. You can't have such a root with an aleph in it. The word that they are trying to construe this text in Chever as is koru. And koru in Hebrew doesn't mean pierce or stab or any of that. That word in Hebrew will be lenakev or dakar. Koru doesn't mean that. Koru means to excavate, to lower, to open. King David asked God to open his ears. It doesn't mean to stab with a knife. King David didn't ask in Psalm 40, stab my ears. So there is no such word. This is object. This is complete nonsense. So the first thing is, they say ko'aru means pierced. It's a lie. There is no. So then what happened in Knuckle Chever? The answer is either it was a Yud and not a Vav. It's not easy to see, but let's for a moment say that it is a Vav. The answer is that the scribe, if it is a Vav and not a Yud, and it's really in between, that means the scribe just was a typographical, meaning he just wrote it. It's sloppily written, as anyone could see if you look at the fragment. It's an error. Now you go, how do you know it's an error? Where do you come to say it's an error? You're in an air-conditioned building in Jakarta, and you're telling him 1800 is an error? Yes, it's an error, because the whole text is filled, replete with errors. In fact, the very next word after ko'ari, or ko'aru, whatever that is, the second to last word there, they actually put in an extra hey. That means the Hebrew word should say yodai, yud, dalad, yud, which means my hands, yodai, my hands. But if you look in the Chever text, the Knuckle Chever text, there's a hey there. That hey doesn't belong there. That's a blatant error. Yud and hey. Now the word yud, dalad, yud, hey does mean something. It means her hands. It means yodeha. So the text in Hever, it's ancient, it's true, but it was written very sloppy. And as a result of that, it's completely ridiculous. So my statement that if that was a vav, then the scribe simply was writing it. I'm not angry at him, but he just wrote it very quickly. It's an error, and the word doesn't mean it anyway. There is no such word as kaf aleph resh vav. It doesn't exist. In order to get the word they're trying to construe it to, you not only have to turn the yud into a vav, you have to extract the aleph, which the Knuckle Hever text doesn't do, and you have to insert a microwave oven. I'm kidding about that last part. Therefore, it's object nonsense. Let's go now back to Vivian. So you hope you got all that. I'm not trying to sell books, but it's in volume 2 of Let's Get Biblical. There's a whole chapter just dedicated to this point.
Rabbi, real quick, let me insert this. If you have his 2-volume book set, look in volume number 2 on page 27, because this is one thing that was really fascinating to me as well, is seeing that you've got it illustrated in writing in a box here, or it doesn't even exist in the Hebrew language at all. So this is the question. This is it. This is the place I was hoping you would go. So page 27, volume 2. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Now, the last question is, Vivian mentioned that she has someone she knows told her that King David apparently had enemies. He had problems. He had, did he have these problems where he would be screaming out to God in agony over his predicament of being rejected and hated, and the answer is, of course. That's why King David is called a tzaddik. That's because he had been betrayed in his life. It means, why would King David even write the book of Psalms? Like, God couldn't come up with anybody else? King David was betrayed throughout his life. He had every excuse to turn his back on God, and he didn't. So King David, his father-in-law, Saul, who was his predecessor, wanted to destroy him, to kill him. His son wanted to murder him. Talk about nachas. I mean, imagine your own kid wants to kill you. His friend wanted to destroy him. King David, at every turn, had enemies. And the enemies were people who were his friend, his kid, his father-in-law, people who, his own wife mocked him. So and please read the context. Go back to chapter 17, 18. King David is all talking about how the difficulties and the challenges of his life, and he's crying out to God for help. And this all comes to an explosion of the most ecstatic chapter in the book of Psalms, perhaps, and that's Psalm 23. Everybody knows that. What's Psalm 23? The Lord is my shepherd. What is that chapter about? It's beautiful. That's the next chapter. Everybody knows Psalm 23, that King David ultimately says, despite all the vicissitudes that he has faced, despite the fact that he has endured so much, despite the fact that he might have thought that God was nowhere to be found, even though he walks in the valley of death, even though he's in the shadow of horrors, that he relies on God, and his source of comfort is from God, and both God's staff and his rod both comfort me. What does it mean, staff and rod? Shiftecha v'shantecha, what does that mean? Well, the staff is the thing that you hold yourself up like a cane. The rod is something that you're beaten with. So therefore, King David said, no matter what happened, I knew that God was with me. He's set a table before me. So that's the whole story of King David. That's why he is so amazing, because although he endured all these difficult times, how easy it is for you, the viewer, think of the worst time of your life, when everything was going wrong, when the people who were supposed to protect you hurt you, turned their back on you, weren't there for you, as happened to King David. In fact, I don't think any of you could say that you went through what King David did, and if you had gone through what King David did, where so many have hurt you, would you still rely on God? Would you walk away from your faith? Hopefully not. But King David is an emblem, is a paradigm of someone who remained faithful to God despite the vicissitudes. So King David is speaking about himself. If you look at the chapter, just read it from the beginning, we don't have a God-man speaking, because he's actually not complaining, but he's going, like, why aren't you there? Why aren't you listening to me? You did answer my ancestors' prayers. What? God is like asking himself a question? Insane. So none of this makes sense. The text was altered in order to make it appear Christological. This alteration of the text is then inserted into editions of Greek translations by most famously Origen and others, Lucerne and so on. And then it appears when you order on Amazon, you order a Septuagint with an English translation, it'll say pierced. But some of the good Christian Bibles, Christian translations that are more honest, like let's say the New Revised Standard Version, in the footnote will tell you that in the Hebrew it says like a lion, because they're a little bit more responsible than the King James. So there's your answer. The answer is, how do you play with my Bible? If you read it, it's delicious, it's beautiful. It lifts you up. It says, oh, if King David endured things that I would never even dream of, and he remained strong with God, and he would merit to have his great-great-grandson to be the Mashiach, how much more so me? I never went through that. I've had tough times, but not like David. So I too am going to rely on God and put my trust in him and his word rather than a text that had been altered by the church.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ועת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת עשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נשא בחפץ הכל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה והוא היה והוא הווה בתפארה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה